Hi everyone, welcome back to another week on the Brush by Brandy YouTube channel, and this week we're working on this piece that's behind me. So this is actually a vanity. I love working on vanities. They're probably one of my favorite things to redo. I just think they can go so over the top and beautiful, and there's so many different colors and looks you can use on them. So I love the shape on this one. It's got gorgeous legs. I already have taken the top back to some raw wood. I do love a raw wood top, and then this one has the different levels on the top. So we're going to add some color to this guy. It's got some primer on it, and then really bring out these details and make these legs a feature. So that's kind of my goal, where I'm going with this vanity. I'm not sure on color yet, so that'll kind of unfold as we go. But we're going to learn how to paint on a mirror. What are some tips on painting mirrors? And I think this one is going to be a gorgeous piece because it's got so much detail to it that was totally lost in the original finish. So stick around and let's get started. Here's where I started on this piece. It's a beautiful piece of furniture, but the body was in pretty rough condition. So it looked like somebody had added a stain over the top at some point and it just didn't stick. So this one needed a lot of prep work. I started out by sanding the top smooth. I want to do a wood stain finish on the top of this, and this top was destroyed. This is part of what we do, saving these old pieces from their existing finishes. I started out by sanding this one smooth and then gave it 2 coats of Wisal primer in light gray. This is an already beautiful piece with incredible details, but I wanted to add a little something extra to the body of this piece, and I'm going to do that using resin molds. This is the Winter Blooms mold from Redesign with Prima, and I'm going to go ahead and cast these using amazing casting resin from Alumilite. I'm going to mix up equal parts of my resin in A and B, and once these are mixed together in the cup, I'll stir for about 30 seconds. You see it turn white, and once that white milkiness goes away, it's ready to pour into my mold. You want to make sure you move pretty quickly because it can start to set up in your cup, and this casting resin cures fully in about 10 minutes. So you want to make sure you've got it fully poured in about 2 minutes, otherwise that's when the setup starts. Once I've poured them into my mold, I just use a popsicle stick to feed my resin into any of the small details that it didn't naturally find on its own. And that's going to make sure that these molds are nice and full and my design is complete. I knew that for the layout that I wanted to create with these molds, I would need to pour them a couple of times. And so once I've got this first pour done, I came back and mixed up a second small batch of my resin, and I'm going to pour that into the remaining areas of my mold. I do have 2 copies of this mold, which made it really nice and saved me some time that I was able to pour 2 versions at the same time. I always recommend mixing up your resin in small batches because this does start to set up so quickly. You never want to over mix up front. So I did this in 2 pours and I was able to go ahead and pour them without feeling rushed. After about 10 minutes, those molds are fully cured and I can go ahead and pop the pieces out. I added a little bit of Titebond Quick and Thick adhesive to the back of each one, and now I'm going to start laying out my design. I always start designs like this by starting with the largest pieces first, and then I'm going to fill in around them with my smaller pieces. Now I do need to cut these molds around the edges of my drawers, and so I'm going to use my oscillating saw from DeWalt, and it's just got a blade that I slide right up in between and it creates a slice. And then I can make sure I glue those back in place with the slice for my drawers to be able to open. I try not to create too many cuts in my mold, so I do try to find a layout that allows me to minimize the cuts that I need to make in the resin, but I can kind of dry fit each piece and play around with the design and fill them in as I needed, all starting with that larger piece to begin with. So you can see I had that larger flower, and then I fill in with my smaller flowers, and then I go to leaves after that, and then from there, any place that I want any little sticks or branches, I'll fill in with those until I come up with a complete design that looks full and natural and organic. So now I can start laying on my paint finish on this one, and it's going to be a beautiful layout of colors. So the colors that I'm using on this are Wisal Inkwell, which is going to be the darkest blue at the bottom. That's going to fade into Wisal Siren Song, which is this light blue that I'm putting on now. It's an absolutely beautiful blue. I have to say it doesn't even do it justice on camera. It's one of their richest colors and I love using it. This is my base coat and I'm just laying it on over some primer. And so I don't need to get this coat perfect. I just want to work out my overall color layout, where I want each of these colors to land on my piece. So this is sort of just my practice coat. It's a rough draft. As I finish out the blues, I'm going to go into a light shade called Mermaid Kiss, and this is going to be it for the blues. These are going to blend up into some pinks. That's going to be really pretty. So this color here is called 1987, and it's this light peachy pink. When I'm blending two really contrasting colors together like this, I try to fade them into a really light shade and then blend the lighter shades together because they're closer in tone. If I were to take dark shades of blue and try to blend them into the light pink, it would be much harder. But because I came up into a lighter shade of blue and down into a lighter shade of pink, those work together nicely in the middle, and then I can make the outer edges be the bolder color. Another tip when you're laying on molds and then going to be painting over the top, you always want to make sure your mold glue has dried fully before you come back and start laying on your paint. Otherwise, that paint can inhibit the glue drying and you'll find that your molds don't attach very well. So make sure those are good and dry before you start your painting process. My final shade of pink is called Red Rock, and it's this beautiful coral color that fades beautifully into that 1987. I'm going to bring it up onto the top lip of this piece. I am going to do a wood stain finish on the top, and I didn't tape off the edges. I'm just going to make sure that I do my final sanding after I'm done with my paint, and that way I can sand off any paint that I happen to get onto the top. All right, I got my base coat all figured out, but it's time to go ahead and come back and perfect this. So I'm going to bring out all my colors again. This coat does take much longer. This is my second coat. It's my final coat. So I'm really going to make sure that I perfect those blends. The other thing that I tend to do on my second coat is I will reverse the order. So you notice on the first coat, I started with my blues down at the bottom. Now I'm going to start up at the top with my coral pink. And I do this because I can tend to be heavy-handed with where I start. And so this kind of balances out my colors if I reverse the order on my second coat. My best tips for blending paint are always use a good quality brush. I'm using my Klingon S50 brushes here. I really like these brushes both for laying paint on and for blending it out. I also like the Wise Owl 1.5 inch round brush for blending. Those are two great brushes that are good to have in your stash. My other tip is to use a little bit of water. A little bit of water will keep your paint moving. You don't want too much water so that it creates a big soupy mess, but just enough so if you feel your paint start getting sticky, you lay a little bit of water into that spot and it's going to keep that paint in motion. Another tip for blending is on the second coat, I also use very little paint. I got most of the coverage that I wanted from my first coat, and so on this coat, I'm just using it to perfect my blending. That doesn't take a whole lot of paint, so I don't fill my brushes very much when I'm doing my second coat. A little bit of paint and a little bit of water, and it helps carry your paint a long way, and I can work those colors together in a really thin finish. To work my way around those molds, I just kind of dig my brush in using a tapping motion. A little bit of water will also help your paint find those deep crevices on the molds because it will kind of drip into those low spots. So I use a little bit of water to get around those molds better. The first thing I need to do is lay the paint onto the body of my piece, and then once I've got those paint colors on, I'm going to start working them together just two colors at a time. So I laid on my darker pink and then my lighter, and then I'm going to start brushing those together. I start out by using a swirling motion. This is just going to pull those colors into each other, and then I use random brush strokes, very soft light brush strokes in every which direction, and this is going to smooth out those swirl marks that I created by pulling the colors together. Once I like that blend, I'm going to come down and I'm going to start working my next two colors together. All right, I'm going to finish this process all the way down the side of the piece, and I didn't speed this up too much so you can see my brush strokes and how these paint colors are working together. Wise Owl is also a really nice paint to blend. So I'm going to turn on some music and you guys go ahead and watch this finish come together. All right, I want to stop and point out I always get asked about blending over the top of my pieces, and I do that with my drawers in. And then what I do is while my paint is still wet, I will pull out each individual drawer and I'm going to blend around the edges. At the same time, I'm wiping away any places that my paint might have gotten built up. If by chance it does have a chance to dry before you get to do this, you can just come back with your sander and lightly sand those areas. But for the most part, I'm able to get it while my paint is still wet. Blend around the edges of my drawers with the color that matches the body front. And this is how I get those drawer edges and don't allow that paint ever to build up. For this top center drawer, I just want to do my same color blend, only I'm just going to use my 3 shades of blue on this one. So I used the Inkwell, the Siren Song, and the Mermaid Kiss on this. I did pull the drawer out, but I went ahead and did my rough blend over top in that first coat. So I know where my color layout needs to be, and then I just make sure and I connect it to the sides while my drawer is still out. I also always pull my drawers out and I'm going to paint around the inside of the frame to match. Now, if there's too much contact and your drawers start sticking, this is where you may need to sand down the edges of your drawers so they fit with those layers of paint added. I did get lucky on this one, and even with those layers of paint, the drawers didn't require any sanding. They still open nice and smooth. These 3 shades of blue make for a beautiful blend. These are great color options if you're looking for a nice shade of blue. All right, my second coat is all done. I'm feeling really good about where this paint finish landed. I went ahead and threw on a quick clear coat onto the body of this piece so that I can start adding some decoration. What the clear coat is going to do is going to protect that perfect blend that I just did. So now I can decorate over top and not worry about ruining my paint finish underneath. This allows me to play around and not feel nervous about anything I do over top. So what I'm going to do here is actually make my molds stand out from the body of this piece. With the blend over the top, you kind of lost sight of them, and so I want to make them stand out a little bit. I'm going to do that using a little bit of my Wise Owl paint in this color called Fireside, which is this beautiful orangish yellow. I laid on a really thin coat of the Fireside over the top of my molds, and I just made sure that I got it into all the crevices of those details. And then I'm just coming back with a wet wipe, and I'm going to go ahead and wipe away any excess paint. I want to make sure I keep these crevices nice and clean. I don't want to get any of this yellow onto the body of my piece. I just want it in those deep areas. For my next step on these flowers, I went ahead and flipped my piece over upside down onto its top. And I'm going to take a couple artist brushes, and the first thing I'm going to do is dry brush a little bit of white paint around the edges of these flowers. This is going to bring out those raised details. So I've got the yellow in the low points on the flowers and then the white in the high points. And then the body colors of my piece are still showing through. So I've got some really nice depth on these flowers. While it was upside down, I also dripped a little bit of my yellow paint kind of running downward on my piece, and it gave them these really cool look, almost like they were on fire. It's a really cool glow around my flowers. Next, I want to accentuate just a few details on this piece using a little bit of gilding wax. I'm using a little bit of Redesign with Prima decor wax. This color is called Eternal, and I'm just applying it using the tip of my finger. I'm going to run it along any areas that I want to emphasize. This gilding wax will dry permanent in about 24 hours, so there's no need to seal it, but I usually do tend to do this, and then I'll go ahead and spray my clear coat over top after it's dried for that 24 hours. I also want to add some wax details into some of the crevices on this piece, so I'm going to frame out some of the drawer moldings and then these side details just using a little bit of black wax. I apply it using an artist brush, and then I'm going to come back with a chip brush and just sort of smudge that off for a nice hazy smudgy effect. I make sure to buff away any excess wax, so it's actually very, very little wax that's left on my surface, but that's all you need. It's just a little bit to add a little bit of a shadowing effect. And don't forget that my paint has already been sealed, so this is just another one of those techniques that I can play around with without the risk of messing up my paint finish underneath. I can play with waxes, paint washes, gilding waxes, anything over top, and I can always remove them if I don't like the look. I came back and finished sanding the top of my piece now that my paint and all my decoration on the body is completely done, but I felt like it looked a little bit orangey against the paint finish, and so I want to go ahead and add a whitewash over top. So I came back with a little bit of my Wise Owl paint in white, and I'm just going to brush it using a little bit of water over the top of this raw wood. While I'm brushing on this thin layer of paint, I make sure that I keep it wet. So I'm going to keep misting my paint because I do want to wipe this back. And if I let it dry, it's going to be really hard to wipe back. As long as I keep it wet, it's still in play and I can wipe it back to as thin a layer as I want. This is how I tend to do whitewashes over raw wood. I'm going to work in small sections at a time so that my paint doesn't dry before I'm done working it. I brushed it on in as even of a coat as I could, making sure to keep it nice and wet and get it into all of the grain of this wood. Once I felt I had a good coat, I came back just using a rag and I wiped it off using linear strokes across the full length of the piece and wiping with my grain. Once I wiped the paint back, I felt like it was still a little bit more uneven than I wanted, so I went ahead and added a little bit of water. I did not add any paint to my brush, and I just rebrushed my paint on a little more even, and then I went ahead and left it. I didn't feel like I needed to wipe it back a second time. Now that I like the look over the top of the wood, I'm just going to wipe around the edges of my piece, make sure I get any of that white paint off of the colored paint finish. I went ahead and finished my whitewash over the last two sections of the top, and this piece is ready for clear coat. I'm going to go ahead and spray Wisal matte varnish. I chose a matte finish because I really wanted a low matte sheen on this for a really sophisticated look. I'm spraying it using my Apollo sprayer, and I did go ahead and spray 2 coats over the body and 4 coats over the top. The matte varnish sprayed incredibly easy in my Apollo sprayer. I found no need to dilute it. I was able to just put it in the sprayer. I went ahead and strained it before I sprayed it, and it sprayed on really nicely with no dilution. Spraying my clear coat is the best way to get a flawless finish. It also helps it get into all the details of the molds that I added to this piece with zero chance of it getting too gummed up in areas or having any spots that tend to drip. Here's my completed piece after clear coat, and don't forget this one is a vanity, so it also has a mirror. I just added a simple vanity stool that I found on Facebook Marketplace and a simple vase of flowers for staging on this one. I wanted to keep it really light, and this piece is complete. You can find links for everything I use in the description for this post, and as always, you can find more Brushed by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube, and on my website at brushedbybrandy.com. Don't forget to click that subscribe button for a weekly painting tutorial here at Brushed by Brandy on YouTube.